By the start of the First World War in 1914, a state licensing culture had taken hold in the United States. On the other hand, the rest of the world was still dominated by European engineering cultures, namely the French and German academic models, and the apprenticeship-based British model. In these systems, only engineers could pass judgment on other engineers. By the end of the 19th century, European nations produced more goods than they could consume. They became more and more reliant on their overseas territories, not just as sources for raw materials, but also as markets for their goods. The resulting race for empire spread European engineering cultures around the world. In Britain, the number of engineering associations grew from 2 in the early 19th century to 17 by 1918. British territories followed this pattern, producing many more groups linking professions and institutions within the empire. As early as 1910, British engineers had become aware of the disadvantages of this situation. However, the proliferation of professional associations in Britain and her empire made consolidation difficult, if not impossible. In 1920 and 21, there was an attempt by the Institution of Civil Engineers to restrict the title of civil engineer to its own members. But this was thwarted by other associations. The result is that even today, British engineering remains a largely fragmented profession. Exasperating the problem is that British employers see little difference between technicians, technical engineers, and professional engineers. Also, education in Britain has not traditionally been seen as a replacement for hands-on training. It was not until the 1960s that a university education became the dominant method of training professional engineers in Britain. After the First World War, European nations were impoverished and in debt. In 1922, after a brief post-war boom, Europe and much of the world fell into depression and economic crisis. In an effort to protect their own industries, nations imposed trade tariffs, dividing the world into trading blocs. This produced protectionist engineering cultures within each bloc. To break this protectionist culture, the United States introduced the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act of 1934. This act ushered in an era of open international trade that is still enjoyed today. From Confederation till the passage of the Statute of Westminster in 1931, Canada's parliamentary powers expanded until they reached legislative equality with the British Parliament. This change in status affected how engineering culture evolved in Canada. Unlike the United States, where the individual states took the lead in certifying engineers, in Canada, it was the Canadian Society of Civil Engineers that took charge of the professionalization of engineering. In 1918, the CSCE changed its name to the Engineering Institute of Canada so that it could better represent all engineering disciplines. However, it could not regulate the profession as those powers fell under provincial jurisdiction. Having little option, the EIC endorsed the concept of the provinces regulating engineers. In the early 1920s, encouraged by the EIC, 7 provinces established engineering associations. Lobbying by these associations for professional self-regulation resulted in the Professional Engineers Act of 1922. Under the Act, the EIC could register engineers, but was stopped short of being allowed to license the profession. After further lobbying by the provincial associations, the Professional Engineers Act was amended in 1937. The amendments allowed for British-style self-regulating protectionism and American-style licensing. However, this led to a conflict between self-regulating associations protecting their members and licensing intended to protect the public. By the 1950s, all persons working in fields of engineering that pose a risk to life, health, and environment had to be licensed. With increased licensing came increased interprovincial restrictions on engineers, similar to the interstate restrictions faced by American engineers earlier in the century. However, it was not until 2009 when the Ontario government introduced the Labour Mobility Act, nearly a century after the Americans first addressed the issue, that a serious attempt was initiated to change the culture of protectionist licensing by professional organizations in Canada. As Canada moved from a group of colonies to a dominion, then to an equal partner within the Commonwealth, federal and provincial responsibilities evolved to accommodate this new structure. This evolution affected how engineers and their organizations were regulated. A hybrid system of British-style self-regulation and American-style licensing took shape. However, this has led to a conflict between associations, protecting memberships and thus limiting the mobility of engineers within Canada. It is only recently in Ontario that legislation has been passed that attempts to remedy this situation.